March 1965. The first American Marines landed in Da Nang, South Vietnam. Helicopters cut through the skies. Troops advanced through the jungle. The world watched. But few knew that this war was already lost. 11 years earlier, in a remote valley, a brutal battle, and a catastrophic mistake that would change history forever. When American soldiers set foot in Vietnam, they believed they would win quickly. Superior technology, absolute air power, the most powerful war machine on the planet. But in a forgotten valley in northern Vietnam, 13,000 French soldiers had already learned a brutal lesson. A lesson the United States was about to completely ignore and pay the price during 20 years of war. Dien Bien Phu, a valley 12 kilometers long, surrounded by mountains covered with impenetrable jungle. It was supposed to be a perfect trap. The French built a fortified base, brought heavy artillery, challenged the enemy to attack. The plan seemed brilliant in theory, but there was a problem: the mountains. And in the mountains, hidden in jungle shadows, an entire army waited. 57 days. That was the duration of the siege. 57 days of relentless bombardment, of nightly assaults, of growing desperation. When it ended, the French Empire in Asia collapsed, and the United States made a fatal decision. They would enter in France's place, fight the same war, on the same terrain, against the same enemy. This is the story of the battle that doomed two superpowers. To understand the Vietnam War, forget everything you know. Forget the helicopters, forget the Marines, forget Saigon burning in '75. The real story begins much earlier. In 1887, when France colonized the region it called French Indochina. Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, all under Paris control. For 60 years, France exploited the region. Rubber plantations, rice, minerals, wealth drained from Asia to Europe. Saigon became the Pearl of the Orient. Elegant colonial buildings, Parisian cafes, a little tropical France. But for the Vietnamese it was oppression. Forced labor on plantations, crushing taxes, overcrowded prisons. Any resistance was brutally crushed by French colonial police. For decades, France drained Vietnam's wealth and planted the seeds of a rebellion that would eventually expel them forever. 1911. A 21-year-old Vietnamese man boarded a French ship. Working as a cook, he visited France, England, the United States. His name was Nguyen Sin Cung, but the world would know him as Ho Chi Minh. In Paris, he witnessed Western hypocrisy, liberty, equality, and fraternity for Europeans, oppression and exploitation for colonies. He became a communist, studied revolution, and returned with one goal: expel the colonizers. 1941. While France was occupied by Nazi Germany, Ho Chi Minh founded the Viet Minh, Revolutionary League for Independence of Vietnam. They were guerrillas. They fought in the jungle, attacked by surprise, disappeared into the mountains. During World War II, they fought against Japanese occupation. Americans even supplied weapons, called Ho Chi Minh an ally. But when the war ended in '45, everything changed. France wanted its empire back. September 1945. French troops landed in Saigon. Ho Chi Minh had declared independence just weeks earlier, but France would not accept it. For Paris, Indochina was essential. Prestige, resources, power. Negotiations failed. Violence erupted. In December '46, French artillery bombarded Haiphong, killing 6,000 civilians. The First Indochina War had begun. France versus Viet Minh, conventional army against guerrilla, 8 bloody years ahead. The war became a nightmare for France. During the day, they controlled cities and main roads. At night, the Viet Minh dominated the countryside. Ambushes were constant. A convoy advanced along a jungle road. Everything seemed calm. Then explosions. Gunfire from all sides. In minutes, dozens of soldiers dead, and the guerrillas disappeared into jungle like ghosts. The French brought more troops, more weapons, more money, but they were losing. Slowly, inexorably. 1953, 8 years of war, 90,000 French soldiers dead or wounded, billions of francs spent. And what did France control? The cities, some roads, isolated bases. The Viet Minh dominated countryside, mountains, rural population. Worse still, Communist China under Mao was supplying modern weapons. Soviet artillery, heavy machine guns, mortars. What began as insurrection transformed into conventional war, and France was losing control. General Henri Navarre took command in May '53. His mission was impossible. Win a war France was losing. Restore troop morale. Force the Viet Minh to negotiate. He developed a bold plan. Establish a fortified base in enemy territory. Lure the Viet Minh into large-scale conventional battle. And destroy them with superior firepower, heavy artillery, continuous air support, impenetrable defenses. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, it would be catastrophic. Navarre chose Dien Bien Phu, a remote valley in northwestern Vietnam, near the Laotian border, surrounded by mountains covered with dense jungle. Strategically, it blocked Viet Minh's supply routes. Tactically, it seemed defensible. There was an airstrip for aerial resupply, space for artillery, elevated positions for observers. French officers looked at terrain and saw a fortress. What they didn't see, or chose to ignore, were the surrounding mountains. And what could be hidden there? November 20th, '53. Operation Castor began. Transport planes flew over Dien Bien Phu. Paratroopers jumped in successive waves. 9,000 men in 48 hours. They encountered minimal resistance. Small Viet Minh detachments withdrew quickly. The French considered this victory. They captured the valley without major losses. Immediately began building fortifications, trenches, bunkers, barbed wire, artillery positions, and gave women's names to positions: Gabrielle, Beatrice, Isabel. They didn't know they were building their tomb. For weeks, construction continued. 13,000 French and colonial troops transformed the valley into a fortified base. The airstrip was expanded, ammunition depots built, field hospitals established, 28 heavy artillery pieces positioned. Colonel Charles Piroth, artillery commander, was confident. He declared that no Viet Minh cannon could threaten the base. If they tried positioning artillery in mountains, they'd be destroyed in minutes. It was impossible, he said, to transport heavy cannons through jungle. He was completely wrong. General Von Nguyen Giap commanded the Viet Minh forces. He studied the situation carefully. Dien Bien Phu was isolated, surrounded, hundreds of kilometers from nearest French bases, depended entirely on aerial resupply, and the surrounding mountains offered perfect positions for artillery. Giap made a bold decision: gather 50,000 soldiers, transport 200 cannons through 400 kilometers of jungle, and completely surround the French. It was impossible. But Giap had something the French underestimated: absolute determination. What happened next was one of the greatest logistical feats in military history. 200,000 Vietnamese porters were mobilized. Men, women, even children, carrying supplies on their backs, pushing modified bicycles transporting 200 kilos each, opening trails through impenetrable jungle, building bridges over rivers, camouflaging everything from French aviation. Each cannon weighed over 2 tons, disassembled, carried piece by piece, reassembled in mountains. It took months. Thousands died from exhaustion, disease, bombing. But the cannons arrived. While the French relaxed at Dien Bien Phu, believing they were safe, surrounding mountains came alive. Tunnels were dug into slopes, cannons positioned in natural caves. Perfectly camouflaged by dense vegetation, French aviation flew over daily, photographed, observed, and saw nothing. Not the 50,000 soldiers, not the 200 cannons, not the tons of stacked ammunition. Giap had created the perfect trap, and the French walked straight into it, confident they were the hunters, when in reality, they were the prey. January 54. Dien Bien Phu seemed secure. Soldiers played cards. Some received mail and gifts from France. Prostitutes were flown in to entertain troops. Officers drank French wine in bunkers. Patrols in mountains encountered only small Viet Minh groups that quickly retreated. French commanders interpreted this as weakness. They didn't realize these were reconnaissance patrols, watching, measuring distances, identifying priority targets, waiting for orders. The storm was approaching, but the French had no idea what was coming. March 13th, 54. At 5 in the afternoon, 50,000 Viet Minh soldiers received final orders. 200 cannons were loaded, mortars positioned, ammunition distributed. In mountains surrounding the valley, an entire army waited in absolute silence. Giap had planned everything meticulously. First, destroy French artillery. Second, disable the airstrip. Third, completely isolate the base. Fourth, slowly strangle defenders. The French had 13,000 men. The Viet Minh, 50,000. The French had 28 cannons. The Viet Minh, 200. 17 hours and 5 minutes. The first Viet Minh cannon fired, then another, and another. In seconds, all mountains exploded in simultaneous fire. 200 cannons bombarding the base at once. The sound was deafening. The sky lit up with explosions. Shells fell like rain. French bunkers disappeared in fireballs. Ammunition depots exploded. Soldiers ran desperately seeking shelter. French artillery tried to respond. But Viet Minh cannons were perfectly camouflaged in mountains, invisible, untouchable, relentless. Position Beatrice was the first target. Defended by French Foreign Legion, veteran soldiers, well-trained, well-armed. But nothing prepared them for the bombardment intensity. For 3 hours, shells fell incessantly. Bunkers collapsed, trenches obliterated. At 22 hours, Viet Minh infantry attacked. Thousands of soldiers emerging from darkness. Hand-to-hand combat, grenades, bayonets. By 6 the next morning, Beatrice had fallen. 500 legionnaires dead, 100 captured. The first fortified position lost in less than 12 hours. March 15th. Colonel Charles Piroth could not accept failure. He had guaranteed French artillery would dominate the battlefield, had ridiculed any suggestion that Viet Minh could position cannons in mountains. Now, his own artillery pieces were being systematically destroyed, unable to respond effectively. He wandered through command, murmuring apologies. "I am completely dishonored," he told colleagues. That night, he retired to his bunker, pulled the pin on a grenade, and killed himself. He was the first of thousands who would die at Dien Bien Phu. March 16th. The airstrip was next priority target. Without it, no plane could land. No reinforcements would arrive, no wounded evacuated. The French would be completely isolated. The bombardment was precise and devastating. Enormous craters destroyed runway surface. Parked aircraft exploded in fireballs. At 10 in the morning, the last plane managed to take off under heavy fire. After that, runway was permanently disabled. 13,000 men were now completely surrounded. 300 kilometers from nearest French base. No escape route. From then on, everything depended on parachutes. French transport planes flew over the base at high altitude, dropped supplies, ammunition, food, medicine. But Viet Minh anti-aircraft guns made every flight a suicide mission. Pilots were shot down regularly. Worse still, many parachutes fell outside the area controlled by French, directly into Viet Minh hands. Estimates suggest 40% of dropped supplies never reached defenders. Meanwhile, bombardment continued day and night, without pause, without mercy. The French began realizing the terrifying truth. They were trapped. March 30th. Monsoon season began. Torrential rain transformed Dien Bien Phu into a swamp of mud. Trenches collapsed, bunkers flooded, wounded drowned in water and mud. Tropical diseases spread rapidly. Dysentery, malaria, infections. The field hospital was overcrowded. Surgeries performed without sufficient anesthesia. Men screamed in pain as limbs were amputated. The stench of decomposing bodies, infected wounds, and excrement was unbearable, and bombardment never stopped. Shells falling randomly, at any moment, day and night. No safe place. Meanwhile, the Viet Minh applied meticulous tactics. Not massive suicidal assaults, but slow and systematic advance. They dug tunnels, complex networks approaching French positions, zigzag trenches, meter by meter. Each night, they advanced a little more. The French could hear the sound of shovels digging. They knew the enemy was approaching, but could do nothing. Throwing grenades into tunnels was useless. Leaving trenches meant certain death from snipers. So they waited, listening, knowing that each night, death came closer. April 4th. Position. Huguet was attacked. Hand-to-hand combat in flooded trenches, soldiers fighting in total darkness. There was no light, only sounds, screams, explosions, gunfire, men drowning in mud while fighting, bayonets piercing flesh, grenades exploding in confined spaces. Dawn revealed piles of bodies. French and Vietnamese mixed. Impossible to distinguish in mud and blood. Huguet resisted, but lost half its garrison. Survivors were beyond exhaustion, without sleep for days, rationing ammunition, sharing last water. France tried to send reinforcements, volunteer paratroopers. They knew they were jumping into a death zone, that they probably wouldn't get out alive, but they jumped anyway. 4,300 men in the last weeks of April, falling under intense anti-aircraft fire. Many were hit still in the air. Parachutes on fire, bodies plummeting. Those who reached ground alive found hell, constant bombardment, mud to their knees, wounded moaning. No real hope of victory, only duty to fight to the end. And the end was coming quickly, for all of them. May 1st. French command in Hanoi realized Dien Bien Phu was lost. Officially, they still spoke of resistance, of possible victory. But privately, they were already planning how to announce defeat. Colonel de Castries, base commander, was in shock. He spent hours in his underground bunker, without leaving, without giving clear orders. Chain of command collapsed. Each position fought alone, without coordination, without hope. Ammunition ran out. There was no more morphine for wounded. The hospital was so full that wounded were left outside, dying in rain and mud. May 6th. Gayap ordered final assault. All artillery pieces bombarded simultaneously. The intensity surpassed everything before. Thousands of shells per hour. Earth shook constantly. Sound was so intense that soldiers bled from their ears. Bunkers that resisted for weeks collapsed. Entire positions disappeared, buried by tons of earth and debris. There was no more possible defense, only survival. Men driven mad by lack of sleep, hunger, and terror. Some simply stopped fighting, sat in trenches waiting for the end, which would come in a few hours. May 7th, noon. 50,000 Viet Minh soldiers attacked from all directions simultaneously. Human waves advancing over destroyed positions. The French fired until last bullet, then used bayonets, then fought with hands. But they were only 1,600 soldiers still capable of fighting, against 50,000. There was no possibility of victory, only death. At 17 hours, French command sent last message. "We are destroying equipment and weapons. Viet Minh is a few meters away. Goodbye." The radio went silent. Forever, Dien Bien Phu had fallen. The red flag with golden star was raised over French command bunker. Viet Minh soldiers shouted victory. 57 days, the longest and bloodiest siege of the war. It was over. 11,000 French soldiers were captured, wounded, starving, traumatized. Many so weak they could barely stand. About 3,000 had died during siege. But Viet Minh casualties were even higher. 23,000 dead or wounded, almost half their forces. But for them, it was a victory worth every life, because it changed everything, forever. The prisoners were forced to march 600 kilometers to camps in the north, many still wounded, without adequate medical treatment, minimal rations. Hundreds died along the way, from exhaustion, infections, dysentery. Of 11,000 captured, only 3,000 would return home. The others would die in captivity, never be properly buried, just disappear into Vietnamese jungle. For their families in France, they became just names on missing lists. Men who left for war and were never seen again, sacrificed in a battle that should never have been fought. News of Dien Bien Phu's fall arrived during Geneva Conference. French, American, Soviet, Chinese, and Vietnamese diplomats negotiating Indochina's future. French defeat eliminated any position of strength in negotiations. In July '54, Geneva Accords were signed. French Indochina ceased to exist. Vietnam was temporarily divided at 17th parallel. Communist North under Ho Chi Minh. Non-communist South supported by the West. National elections would be held in '56 to reunify the country. But those elections would never happen. The 17th parallel artificially divided Vietnam. An imaginary line separating families, villages, millennial traditions. Nearly 1 million Vietnamese fled from north to south, mainly Catholics, fearing communist persecution. Other thousands of Viet Minh supporters remained in south, waiting for promised elections, waiting for reunification. But United States, fearing communist victory at polls, supported canceling elections, supported Ngo Dinh Diem as South Vietnam leader, and began sending military advisors, money, weapons, slowly, replacing France. President Eisenhower explained American policy with domino theory. If Vietnam falls to communism, he declared, then Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, all will fall like dominoes. Communism will dominate Asia. It was a simplistic vision. It ignored local nationalisms, complex histories, regional rivalries. But it dominated American policy for 20 years and justified increasing intervention. In '55, they were just advisors. In '60, thousands of military personnel. In '65, hundreds of thousands, and helicopters, planes, bombers. First, American military advisors arrived discreetly, training South Vietnamese soldiers, evaluating the enemy, completely underestimating Viet Minh determination. As the French had done, they believed in technological superiority, in firepower, in conventional strategy. But Vietnam was not a conventional war. It was a war of independence, of determination against resources, of patience against haste. The French learned this at Dien Bien Phu, paid with 11,000 captured and 90,000 dead in 8 years. Americans were about to learn the same lesson. Ho Chi Minh watched Americans arrive calmly. He had fought against Japanese, then French, now Americans. It didn't matter. His determination remained absolute. "You can kill 10 of ours for each one of yours," he supposedly said. "But even so, you will lose and we will win." It was brutal mathematics, inhuman, but effective. Because for Ho Chi Minh and Vietnamese people, there was no alternative. It was independence or death, no middle ground, no negotiation possible. While Americans could go home, declare victory or defeat, and move on. March 65. 11 years after Dien Bien Phu, American helicopters flew over the same jungle, transporting soldiers to same war, facing same enemy, on same impossible terrain. The pilots were confident, technology superior, training impeccable. But looking down, they saw same impenetrable jungle, same treacherous mountains, same villages where they couldn't distinguish friends from enemies. And although they didn't know it yet, they carried same fate. The repetition of history, the tragedy of ignoring past lessons. Dien Bien Phu had been a warning, completely ignored. American-Vietnam War would last 20 years. 58,000 American soldiers dead, 300,000 wounded, millions of Vietnamese dead, entire villages destroyed by bombing, jungles poisoned by Agent Orange, children burned by napalm. And in the end, in April '75, helicopters would evacuate Americans from Saigon embassy rooftop, while North Vietnamese tanks invaded the city. Same red flag with golden star raised at Dien Bien Phu would be raised again over Independence Palace. Vietnam reunified, under communist government, exactly what French tried to prevent. Today, Dien Bien Phu is a peaceful valley. Rice fields, quiet villages, a national cemetery honors Viet Minh dead. Museum preserves history. Tourists visit reconstructed trenches, preserved bunkers, trying to imagine the hell that happened there in '54. But real monuments aren't in the valley, they're in history books in military academies, in lessons that should have been learned, but weren't. Dien Bien Phu proved that determination surpasses technology, that knowing terrain is worth more than firepower, that independence wars cannot be won by foreign powers. Dien Bien Phu was the beginning, not the end. It was the first ignored warning, first unlearned lesson. In '68, during Tet Offensive, Americans would learn again. In '75, at Saigon's fall, they would learn for last time. But those are stories for next episodes. For now, remember this. In March '65, when American helicopters flew over Vietnam for first time, someone should have asked, what happened at Dien Bien Phu? Why did French lose? Are we making same mistakes? The answers were there, in mountains, in jungles, but nobody asked, and history repeated itself.